In today's episode, we're looking back at the most horrifying deaths we covered on this channel throughout 2025, revisiting the cases that kept you on edge and sparked countless questions. Let's dive straight in. It was February 22, 1992, at Les Arcs, France, where the Winter Olympics were in their final days. Among the athletes preparing for competition was Nicolas Bochatai, a 27-year-old Swiss speed skier and carpenter. Just days earlier, he had reached an impressive 130 miles per hour in qualifying, placing 13th. Now, he was gearing up for his final practice run before the speed skiing demonstration event. Speed skiing, though not an official Olympic sport, had captured attention for its sheer intensity. Athletes, wrapped in aerodynamic suits, raced down steep slopes at speeds exceeding 120 miles per hour. Nicolas came from a family deeply rooted in skiing. His aunt, Fernanda Bochatai, had won bronze in the 1968 Winter Olympics giant slalom. For him, the sport was both tradition and passion. That morning, around 9:30 a.m., Nicolas joined his teammate Pierre-Yves Joran and several American skiers for a warm-up session. They opted for a public slope next to the official speed skiing course, a common practice for competitors testing their equipment. The group had already made several runs, using a small bump in the slope to catch air and adjust their form. The conditions seemed ideal. The morning air was crisp, visibility clear. Nicolas, wearing slalom skis instead of his specialized speed skis, took his turn. As he approached the familiar bump, he gained speed and lifted off. But what he didn't see was the snow grooming machine positioned just beyond the hill. The collision was immediate and catastrophic. Traveling at high velocity, Nicolas struck the snowcat upon landing, his body slamming into the machine's metal structure. The impact was concentrated on his upper body, with his head taking the brunt of the force. The sheer speed at which he was moving left no chance for survival. He suffered massive head trauma and severe internal injuries, dying almost instantly. His helmet, designed for aerodynamics rather than full impact protection, provided little defense against the crushing blow. His teammates, watching from different vantage points on the slope, rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. Controversy soon followed. The Swiss team argued that the snow grooming machine had been parked behind the hill without warning signals. However, Jean-Albert Corrand, Director General of COJO, insisted the vehicle had been moving uphill with both a siren and flashing lights activated. The conflicting accounts only deepened the sense of tragedy. Despite the morning's events, the speed skiing finals proceeded as scheduled, yet the competition unfolded under the weight of loss, as Nicolas became the third athlete to die at a Winter Olympics. His name joined British luger Kazimierz Kai Skrzypewski and Australian skier Ross Milne, both of whom had perished at the 1964 Innsbruck Games. Tragically, Nicolas's accident was not the first of its kind. 4 years earlier, during the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary, Dr. Jörg Oberhammer, an Austrian ski team doctor, met a similar fate. While skiing recreationally, he collided with another skier, lost balance, and was pulled under a snow grooming machine. The vehicle, in motion at the time, ran over him, causing immediate fatal injuries. Despite safety measures implemented after Oberhammer's death, Nicolas's accident proved that such tragedies could still occur. For the Olympic community, the accident underscored concerns about athlete safety, particularly on public slopes during competition periods. The fact that Nicolas had been skiing recreationally, rather than in an official training session, raised questions about the precautions in place. The tragedy played a role in speed skiing's exclusion from future Olympic programs. Nicolas left behind a wife and 2 young children. His death resonated deeply in Switzerland, where he had been the national speed skiing champion in 1991. The loss of such a talented athlete, especially one from a family with Olympic ties, struck at the heart of Swiss sports.
It was February 27, 2015, and 18-year-old Dalen Moke Pua woke up early in his grandmother's house in Kaneohe, Hawaii, with adventure on his mind. The athletic teenager had always been drawn to Hawaii's most challenging hiking trails, spending weekends exploring hidden waterfalls and remote beaches that most tourists never discovered. His friends knew him as fearless, the type of guy who would climb the tallest coconut palm or dive from the highest cliff without hesitation. Daylen had been researching the infamous Haiku Stairs for months, studying online forums and watching YouTube videos of other hikers who had attempted the illegal trail. Known locally as the Stairway to Heaven, the 4,000-step metal staircase had been built during World War II to access a military radio station but had been closed to the public since 1987. The trail was notorious for its narrow passages, some sections only 18 inches wide, with sheer drops of over 2,000 feet on either side. His grandmother Martha had repeatedly warned him about the dangers, sharing stories of hikers who had fallen to their deaths or become lost in the dense jungle surrounding the stairs. But Daylen was confident in his abilities, having successfully completed dozens of challenging hikes across Oahu's mountain ranges. He told his family he was going on a routine hike that morning, carefully avoiding any mention of his true destination. At 6:30 a.m., he grabbed his backpack, phone, and water bottle, kissing his grandmother goodbye before heading out into the humid Hawaiian morning. The first few hours of Daylen's climb went smoothly as he sent regular selfies and photos to his grandmother, documenting his progress up the steep metal stairs. His early photos showed him smiling confidently, the lush green mountains of Oahu stretching endlessly behind him. As he climbed higher, the views became more spectacular, but the trail also became increasingly treacherous, with rusted metal steps and missing handrails creating deadly obstacles. Around 10:30 a.m., Daylen took what would become his most famous and mysterious photograph. The image showed him posing on the stairs, but in the background, barely visible among the dense vegetation, was a dark figure crouching in the bushes. The figure appeared to be watching him, though its identity and intentions remain unknown to this day. Daylen continued climbing, unaware that someone, or something, might be following his progress. At exactly 11:00 a.m., Daylen's regular stream of photos and messages suddenly stopped without explanation. His phone showed no further activity, and his grandmother began to worry when hours passed without contact. Other hikers in the area later reported hearing desperate cries for help echoing through the jungle, with voices shouting, "Help me! I'm down here!" But despite extensive searching, no one could locate the source of the calls. When Daylen failed to return home that evening, his family immediately contacted authorities and reported him missing. The Honolulu Fire Department launched a massive search operation that would continue for 5 days, involving helicopters, ground teams, volunteers, and even the U.S. Navy. Drones scoured the dense jungle canopy while experienced climbers rappelled down cliff faces, but no trace of Daylen was ever found. The search efforts continued sporadically for years, with volunteers and family members refusing to give up hope. The mysterious figure in Daylen's final photograph sparked countless theories and investigations, but its identity was never determined. In 2021, the Haiku Stairs were finally scheduled for removal due to safety concerns and illegal trespassing, but Daylen's disappearance remains one of Hawaii's most haunting unsolved mysteries.
It was March 15, 2019, when Mario and Elena Rodriguez embarked on what they hoped would be a journey to rediscover their love for each other, high above the fairy tale landscape of Cappadocia, Turkey. Mario, a 34-year-old petroleum engineer from Houston, had spent the last 6 months drowning in 80-hour work weeks on a critical offshore drilling project. His calloused hands and tired eyes told the story of a man who had forgotten what it meant to truly live. Elena, 31, worked as a pediatric nurse at Texas Children's Hospital, where she had been pulling double shifts during the brutal flu season. The couple's once vibrant relationship had withered under the weight of exhaustion and endless arguments about whether they were ready to start a family. The Turkey trip was their Hail Mary, a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of their 7-year marriage. Mario, ever the engineer, had researched balloon companies online, but settled on a mid-tier operator that had recently expanded rapidly to meet tourist demand. Elena, always the cautious one, had voiced concerns about the 6 a.m. departure time, especially since they were both jet-lagged and had shared 2 bottles of Turkish wine the previous evening. That fateful morning, they joined 14 other passengers in a standard wicker basket, their pilot a young man with only 200 flight hours under his belt. As dawn broke over Cappadocia's otherworldly rock formations, the balloon lifted gracefully into the crisp morning air. For the first time in months, Mario and Elena felt a spark of the connection that had brought them together. But at 6:45 a.m., As they descended to 150 feet for a closer view of the valley, morning fog rolled in like a silent predator, reducing visibility to less than 100 meters. Hidden in the mist were newly installed high-voltage transmission lines that stretched across the valley like invisible death traps. The basket struck the power lines with devastating force. Electrical arcing illuminated the fog in brilliant, deadly flashes as the balloon's envelope immediately deflated. Mario instinctively gripped the metal rim of the basket, but the electrical current caused his muscles to contract violently, trapping his hands as thousands of volts coursed through his body, leaving severe burns across his arms and torso. Elena was thrown from the basket during the 80-foot plummet, her body striking the rocky terrain below. The impact caused a basilar skull fracture, and she lost consciousness instantly, never knowing that her husband was fighting for his life above her. Mario survived the fall but suffered internal bleeding from a ruptured spleen. As he lay in the twisted wreckage of the basket, his engineer's mind processed the cruel irony. The power lines had been installed just 6 months earlier, but aviation charts hadn't been updated to reflect the new hazard. He lost consciousness within 10 minutes, his life ebbing away as he thought of Elena and the family they would never have. Turkish emergency services arrived 45 minutes later, but it was too late. Both Mario and Elena had succumbed to their injuries, their final journey together ending not in reconciliation, but in tragedy. The investigation that followed revealed a cascade of failures: outdated navigation charts, inadequate pilot training, and insufficient safety protocols. The balloon company eventually implemented GPS mapping requirements and minimum visibility standards, but these changes came too late for the couple who had simply wanted to fall in love again among the clouds. Their story serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes our desperate attempts to fix what's broken can lead us into dangers we never saw coming.
It was November 2017, and 20-year-old Toni Kelly was living her dream European adventure, documenting every moment for her thousands of social media followers back in New Zealand. The vibrant young woman had saved for months to afford the trip, working multiple jobs while studying to fund her travels across Europe. Her infectious enthusiasm and creative photography had earned her a growing following of people who loved experiencing her adventures vicariously through her posts. Toni had been traveling for several weeks, visiting Paris, Amsterdam, and other major European cities before arriving in London. She was staying in a modest hotel in the city center, excited to explore the historic landmarks and cultural attractions that she had dreamed of seeing since childhood. Her social media accounts were filled with photos from famous locations, always featuring her bright smile and adventurous spirit. The evening of the incident had been particularly enjoyable for Toni, who had spent the day sightseeing and socializing with other travelers she had met at her hotel. She had been documenting her London experience with various photos and was known among her followers for taking creative selfies that captured both her personality and the beauty of her surroundings. Her room on the second floor offered views of the London cityscape, which she found inspiring for photography. As the evening progressed, Toni decided to take one final selfie from her hotel room window to capture the London lights behind her. She had been drinking earlier in the evening and was in high spirits about her travel experiences, eager to share another memorable image with her followers. The window in her room opened fully, providing an unobstructed view of the street below and the city beyond. Toni opened the second floor window and leaned out to get the perfect angle for her photo, trying to frame herself against the London skyline. In her attempt to capture the ideal shot, she leaned too far out of the window and lost her balance. The combination of alcohol, the awkward position required for the selfie, and the height of the window created a deadly situation that unfolded in seconds. She fell from the second floor to the pavement below, suffering severe brain injuries from the impact with the concrete. Other hotel guests heard the commotion and immediately called emergency services, who arrived within minutes and rushed Toni to the hospital in critical condition. Medical teams worked frantically to save her life, but the trauma to her brain was too severe. Despite the best efforts of medical professionals, Toni never recovered from her injuries and passed away in the hospital several days later. A coroner's inquest later revealed that she had alcohol and cocaine in her system at the time of the fall, which likely contributed to her impaired judgment and loss of balance. In a final act of generosity, Toni's family made the decision to donate her organs, giving others a second chance at life through her tragedy. Her death became international news as another example of selfie-related fatalities among young travelers, prompting discussions about hotel window safety and the risks of taking selfies from dangerous positions.
It was January 12, 2020, when Thomas and Marie Dubois embarked on what should have been the highlight of their Myanmar honeymoon. Thomas, a 29-year-old civil engineer from Lyon, possessed the methodical precision that made him excellent at his job, but sometimes overly trusting of official recommendations. His new wife, Marie, 27, worked as a museum curator specializing in Southeast Asian art, her scholarly nature balanced by an adventurous spirit that had drawn Thomas to her during their university days. The couple had married just 3 weeks earlier in an intimate ceremony, choosing Myanmar for their honeymoon because Marie had spent years studying Bagan's magnificent Buddhist temples through photographs and academic papers. She yearned to experience firsthand the ancient structures she knew only from books. Thomas, ever the planner, had meticulously crafted their itinerary, booking the sunrise balloon flight through their hotel concierge, who enthusiastically recommended a local operator. During the pre-flight briefing, Marie's trained eye noticed the balloon equipment appeared older than expected. Her academic background had taught her to observe details others might miss, and something felt off about the frayed edges of the balloon's fabric. She voiced her concerns to Thomas, but he reassured her that Myanmar's tourism operators were properly regulated. His engineering mindset trusted official oversight systems, perhaps too much. At 5:45 a.m., their balloon lifted off with 8 other passengers, initially delivering the breathtaking experience they had anticipated. Below them stretched over 2,000 ancient pagodas scattered across the plains like forgotten jewels, their silhouettes emerging from morning mist, in a scene Marie had only imagined. For 20 precious minutes, they floated peacefully at 800 feet, Thomas capturing photos while Marie identified temple architectural styles she recognized from her studies. Then disaster struck. The balloon's envelope developed a small tear. The deteriorated fabric finally succumbed to stress. Marie watched with growing alarm as their altitude gradually decreased over the next 20 minutes. The pilot attempted an emergency landing at 6:30 a.m., targeting an open field, but misjudged their approach speed due to the balloon's compromised lift capacity. The basket struck the ground with devastating force, dragging 50 meters across uneven terrain before finally stopping. Thomas, who had instinctively shielded Marie during impact, suffered multiple rib fractures and severe internal bleeding. The methodical man who had planned every detail of their trip now fought for breath as his body went into shock. Marie was thrown from the basket during the violent dragging phase, her body striking the rocky ground with a crushing impact. The woman who had spent years studying ancient structures now lay motionless, her spine severely damaged, paralyzed from the chest down. Myanmar's emergency services, hampered by the remote location and basic equipment, took 90 minutes to reach them. Thomas, the careful engineer who had trusted the system, died within 30 minutes from internal bleeding, never seeing the temples Marie had dreamed of exploring together. Marie, the scholar who had finally seen her beloved pagodas from above, succumbed to complications 2 hours later, her dreams of walking among the ancient stones forever unfulfilled. The subsequent investigation revealed the balloon's envelope fabric had exceeded its recommended service life and lacked proper inspection. The tragedy that claimed 2 young lives led to increased oversight by Myanmar's tourism ministry and mandatory equipment inspections, ensuring future couples would not share the Dubois' fate while pursuing their dreams among Bagan's timeless temples. It was September 17, 2016. Wind tore through Vernadza as waves slammed the cliffs below. At a clifftop restaurant, tourists sat for dinner, unaware how close they were to the edge of the view and of danger. Donna Carpenter, a 58-year-old retired hospice nurse from Madison, Wisconsin, had spent 3 decades beside dying patients, offering comfort few could sustain. She'd postponed her own dreams to care for others. First her clients, then her husband through his final illness. After he passed, Donna finally made plans she'd deferred for years. This Italian journey was her first real vacation in decades. Friends described her as the type who booked every ticket and hotel 6 months in advance. She'd studied guidebooks obsessively, researched each destination, and planned every detail of her Cinque Terre adventure. That evening, she'd joined a guided group dinner at the Clifftop restaurant, an add-on event promising authentic local cuisine with panoramic ocean views. The trattoria seemed charming, weathered stone tables, flickering candles, and breathtaking vistas of the darkening sea. But locals had been warning tour operators about dangerous conditions. High winds had battered the coast for days, weakening terrace walls and destabilizing cliff paths. Several diners questioned the weather that evening. The restaurant host dismissed their concerns, insisting the winds were typical and the stone railings had held for years. Donna chose a table at the terrace's outer edge, drawn by the open view. The stone wall in front of her looked solid, weathered but dependable. At first glance, there seemed to be no reason to question it. By dessert, wind gusts intensified dramatically. Multiple witnesses reported a powerful blast sweeping across the terrace, lifting tablecloths and sending silverware clattering. A wine glass toppled toward the edge. Donna instinctively stood to catch it, her left foot stepping into loose gravel scattered beneath the table. The gravel gave way instantly. Donna's feet slid out from under her and her lower back slammed the stone wall with a sickening thud. She tipped backward over the edge, arms flailing, and vanished. A dull, wet crack echoed seconds later from the rocks below. Blood splattered up the cliff face. There was no time to react. A man at the adjacent table lunged desperately but missed. Guests screamed as staff members rushed to the wall, shouting into the howling wind. The slope dropped nearly 80 feet to jagged rocks below. Rescue workers found Donna's body wedged in a narrow crevice, her neck and spine shattered by the devastating fall. Italian authorities immediately sealed the restaurant's clifftop dining area. Structural inspections revealed multiple safety violations. The stone wall was below legal height, and no proper anchoring barriers had been installed. They faced heavy fines and forced closure of its cliffside operation. Donna's daughter arrived in Vernazza 2 days later to claim her mother's body. The woman who had faced death professionally for 30 years had met her own in a moment of preventable tragedy, alone on vacation behind a wall that should have been higher. It was July 22, 2018, a Wednesday morning in Orderville, Utah. The desert air was hot and dry, and the steep canyon walls were quiet and everything seemed calm. But deep in one of the park's narrow canyons, something deadly was coming, and no one saw it yet. 24-year-old Clara Min had an engineering mind, calculating risks with the same precision she applied to her studies. Her world was built on careful planning, weather apps checked obsessively, backup gear for every scenario, contingency plans rehearsed. She was pursuing her master's in structural engineering, but the canyon walls called to her more than campus laboratories. However, that July morning, something shifted in Clara's usually cautious approach. The forecast showed scattered storms in distant mountains, yet Utah remained bone dry. The ground was hard-packed, the sky crystalline blue. She and her 3 friends had been planning this adventure for more than 2 months, poring over topographical maps, analyzing elevation profiles, and reviewing every available trip report from the past 3 seasons. Clara even emailed a former guide who'd done it the previous summer, asking about anchor conditions and flow risks. They had timed their permits to avoid peak monsoon windows, and each had practiced ascending techniques in a local climbing gym weeks before the trip. Clara mentioned that the risk seemed manageable. Considering she'd navigated dozens of canyons across the Southwest, her friends conformed. But this time it was different. In the canyons of the Southwest, water doesn't need to fall where you stand. Clara clipped into her rappel line first, testing the anchor and running the rope through her device. Her 3 friends stood above, helmets catching the high desert sun as they waited for her to descend into the shadowed chute below. It was the last moment when everything still felt safe. Halfway down, they heard it, a low murmur at first, like distant wind, but the sound deepened, thickened, became a dull, endless roar that vibrated up through the stone. The friends peered down the canyon's bend. Around the corner, darkness surged forward. A wall of water, thick and brown, slammed into the slot like a freight train of mud. In the space of a heartbeat, calm turned to catastrophe. Clara was suspended 12 feet above the canyon floor when the surge reached her. Her rappel line whipped against the wall and snagged on a jagged ledge. She twisted, trying to unjam it, her dry bag scraping violently against the sandstone. There was no more time for choices, only reaction. She reached for her knife, face pale, eyes wide, but the water hit before she could ascend. The friends above screamed helpless as Clara was thrown sideways by the force. Her harness swung violently and dropped her into the chaos just as the flood crested. She vanished beneath the surface. Her helmet surfaced once, just long enough to strike a protruding rock, then disappeared as her body was pulled into a siphon barely 2 feet wide. Gone in seconds. The others scrambled back from the edge, then moved to a higher ledge trapped by rising water. The canyon below filled like a sealed pipe. They used their phones to call for help, and for 30 minutes all they could do was wait, watching as the flood consumed everything: gear, debris, sound, and hope. A helicopter rescue brought them to safety before the flash flood reached them. Search teams found Clara's body the next morning, lodged beneath a submerged rock shelf over a mile downstream. In the funeral, one of her friends said briefly that Clara always double-checked her gear, triple-checked the forecast, and that she didn't deserve to vanish like that. Orderville remained open, but new signs appeared at its trailhead. Small, weatherproof plaques warning that dry skies don't mean safety. One of them includes a date, July 22, 2020. No name, just the day everything changed for a group of 4 who thought they'd planned for everything. It was December 28, 2015. The sun dipped behind the horizon at Tana Lot, casting gold across the sea and shadowing the ancient temple perched on its wave-carved rock. Tourists clustered along the shoreline with phones raised, mesmerized by the fading light. The tide was rising steadily, pushing waves closer to the narrow land bridge connecting the sacred temple to shore. Ethan Sanders, a 39-year-old warehouse supervisor from Missoula, Montana, stood with his wife Kara and their 2 sons, ages 10 and 12. This was his first overseas trip, a family vacation to Bali that he'd planned meticulously for months. Ethan had been fascinated by Balinese spirituality and water temples, particularly Tana Lot's dramatic setting where ancient stone met relentless ocean. That day, as sunset approached, he spotted a lower rock shelf near the barrier rope, just close enough to capture the perfect shot of waves crashing against sacred stone. However, local staff had repeatedly warned visitors not to cross the marked boundary during high tide. Signs were posted in English and Indonesian, clearly marking dangerous zones. But at that time, the shelf likely appeared solid and dry enough for Ethan for a quick photo opportunity. Ethan glanced back at his family, mentioned getting a better angle, and stepped beyond the safety barrier. A nearby guide watched him climb down carefully, camera in hand, onto rocks slick with algae and ocean mist. The sea had been deceptively calm moments before. But then, a massive rogue wave, likely triggered by sudden underwater currents, surged toward shore with devastating force. Witnesses described it as a moving wall that struck faster and louder than anything they'd seen that evening. The wave hit the shelf broadside, sending thick spray and foam exploding skyward. Ethan was struck squarely in the chest by the crushing water. The impact knocked him flat and dragged him backward off the rocky ledge into churning ocean. Kara screamed as their sons froze in shock. Tourists shouted desperately while one local guide rushed down with a bamboo pole, but Ethan had already disappeared beneath the surface. For a terrifying moment, he reappeared floating face down between swells, completely motionless. Another massive wave crashed over him, and he vanished permanently into the violent churn beneath the rock ledges. A search team was dispatched within 30 minutes after being informed by the local witnesses. Rescuers and police used boats and spotlights, combing the treacherous shoreline well into the night. Divers finally located Ethan's body 2 hours later, wedged under a submerged rock shelf half a mile south. An autopsy confirmed massive blunt force trauma and drowning. Balinese authorities responded by stating that existing warnings had been clear and that tourists were responsible for respecting tide conditions. No changes were made to the site. The family flew home with Ethan's body 3 days later. His funeral in Missoula was small and heartbreaking. His sons placed coral stones they'd collected from the site on top of his grave, a final connection to the place that had claimed their father. A silent morning in Iceland's Vatnajökull glacier. The only sounds were the distant whisper of wind across frozen peaks and the occasional crack of shifting glacial mass. 31-year-old Sojin Park adjusted his helmet at the mouth of an ice cave. surrounded by translucent walls that gleamed like cathedral glass. In this pristine wilderness, a tragedy was about to unfold. Sojun had always been drawn to the edges of comfort zones. Born in Busan, South Korea, and raised in Seattle, Sojun blended two cultures and a lifelong curiosity into a life defined by movement. He held a master's degree in glaciology, worked freelance in alpine cartography, and published breathtaking drone footage of Arctic terrain. And recently he'd spent months planning an expedition with three close friends, Minjae, Lucas, and Eli. All were experienced climbers, but Sojun possessed the technical expertise that made him their natural leader. He was the one who charted new routes, triple-checked gear, and stayed up at night marking changes in satellite imagery. Their destination this time was Vatnajökull's famed ice network in southeast Iceland, specifically an undocumented corridor whispered about in climbing forums, the Blue Labyrinth. But on the day of the expedition, their guide, Halldór, had warned them about a recent melt causing stress fractures throughout the lower chambers. There's a possibility that the fragments of the cave might fall from above. He'd advised them to stay near the upper corridors, but the beauty of the Blue Labyrinth pulled them deeper. Light from their headlamps danced off walls so clear they seemed made of crystal. Roughly 650 feet in, something shifted. A low groan pulsed through the ice, nature's warning that went unheeded. Sojun motioned the group forward across a shallow basin filled with slush water. That's when the sound came. A sharp crack like thunder echoed through the corridor. The ceiling above them split. Halldór yelled from the entrance. Eli sprinted. Lucas slipped but recovered. Minjae ran. But Sojun was mid-stride when the ice gave way. A 10-foot slab dropped straight down, catching his left leg and hip. He fell backwards into the pool, the impact sending waves across the basin. The slab pinned him waist-deep in icy water. Another chunk fell, shattering his helmet. The cave shuddered, smaller pieces collapsing like glass. Halldór reached the ledge 20 seconds later but couldn't cross. The basin was churning, jagged chunks of ice crashing into one another as the collapse continued. They saw Sojun's mouth moved once. He looked up, then stopped. Recovery teams arrived 4 hours later. Divers found him submerged, wedged between ice and rock. He had drowned in the crystal-clear water that had first drawn him deeper. The news reached their families before sunrise. The Blue Labyrinth was sealed permanently. His friends returned to Iceland each year but never speak of the cave. The glacier mourned quietly, its ancient ice holding secrets too profound for words.
It was April 1st, 2014, and best friends Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon were living their dream adventure in the mountain town of Boquete, Panama. The 21 and 22-year-old Dutch students had arrived 2 weeks earlier to volunteer teaching local children, staying with a welcoming host family who had quickly grown fond of the enthusiastic young women. Both were experienced travelers who had backpacked through Europe together, but the dense jungle terrain of Central America presented challenges they had never encountered before. Chris, a cultural social work student, was known for her infectious laugh and ability to connect with people from any background. Lisanne, studying applied psychology, was the more cautious of the two, always researching destinations thoroughly and keeping detailed travel journals. They had spent their first weeks in Panama learning basic Spanish phrases and exploring the charming coffee town of Boquete, taking hundreds of photos to share with friends and family back in the Netherlands. The girls had planned their hike on the popular El Pianista Trail as a simple day trip, bringing along their host family's dog for companionship and protection. The trail was well known among tourists for its beautiful views of the surrounding mountains and cloud forests, typically taking 2 to 3 hours to complete. They packed light snacks, water bottles, and their cameras, excited to capture Panama's natural beauty and add new photos to their growing collection of travel memories. The morning started perfectly as Chris and Lisanne took cheerful selfies at the trailhead, their faces beaming with excitement as they posed with the family dog. The first hour of hiking was exactly what they had hoped for: scenic views, exotic birds, and the peaceful sounds of the jungle surrounding them. Their early photos showed them laughing and enjoying each other's company, completely unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. As they continued deeper into the jungle, their photos began to show a subtle change in mood. The smiles became less frequent, and their expressions grew more serious, as the trail became less defined and more challenging to navigate. Around 1 p.m., they took their final daytime photos before mysteriously continuing past the trail's normal endpoint, venturing into uncharted territory where few tourists had ever traveled. 6 hours later, at 4:39 p.m., their phones registered the first of what would become 77 desperate attempts to call emergency services. The calls showed a pattern of increasing panic as the girls realized they were lost and in serious danger. Only one call managed to connect for exactly 2 seconds before the signal was lost, leaving them stranded without any means of communication with the outside world. When the girls failed to return that evening, their host family immediately contacted local authorities and launched a search operation. The initial efforts involved local police, volunteers, and eventually international search teams, but the dense jungle terrain made progress extremely difficult. For 10 weeks, there was no trace of Chris and Lisanne, leading to widespread speculation about their fate. The breakthrough came when a local woman discovered Lisanne's backpack by a riverbank, perfectly preserved and containing their phones, camera, and other personal items. The camera revealed the most disturbing evidence: 90 photos taken during the night of April 8th, 7 days after their disappearance. The haunting images showed makeshift markers, plastic bags, and what appeared to be attempts to signal for help in complete darkness. Search teams eventually found scattered remains along the riverbank, with some bones mysteriously bleached white despite the short time period. Most disturbing was the discovery that one crucial photo had been deliberately deleted from the camera. The case remains officially unsolved, with theories ranging from tragic accident to foul play, but the truth about what happened to Chris and Lisanne may never be known.
It was July 14, 1912 in Stockholm, where the Summer Olympics were in full stride. The Games had drawn over 2,400 athletes from 28 nations, marking historic firsts: the introduction of electronic timing, Japan's debut as the first Asian competitor, and Portugal's first Olympic appearance. Among the Portuguese delegation was Francisco Lázaro, a 24-year-old marathon runner who carried the nation's flag in the opening ceremony. For Francisco, the Olympics represented the pinnacle of a journey built on endurance and determination. Born in Lisbon, he worked as a carpenter and balanced his training with shifts at an automobile factory. Running for SL Benfica, he had won 3 national marathon titles, earning his place in Stockholm. This was his chance to prove himself on the world's biggest stage. That morning, as temperatures climbed, Francisco made a fateful decision. Following a common practice of the time, he covered his body with sweat, a thick layer of animal fat, believing it would shield him from the sun and enhance his performance. The marathon, slightly shorter than today's standard at 25 miles, would push athletes to their limits under the scorching Swedish summer. Out of 95 registered runners, only 68 started the race, wary of the growing heat. Wearing number 518, Francisco maintained a steady pace through the early stages. At water stations, he paused briefly before pressing on. The unrelenting temperatures soon took a toll. 32 runners dropped out as the race wore on. What Francisco didn't realize was that the sweat coating his skin was preventing his body from sweating, while other runners perspired freely, allowing their bodies to regulate temperature. He was unknowingly trapping heat. As the miles passed, his core temperature began to rise dangerously. At the 19-mile mark, Francisco suddenly collapsed. Race officials rushed to his side, finding him delirious and severely overheated. His body temperature had soared to 41 degrees Celsius, a level far beyond human endurance. Medical staff worked frantically to cool him down, but his condition continued to deteriorate. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, where doctors fought through the night to stabilize him. Despite their efforts, Francisco succumbed to heat stroke at 6 a.m. on July 15th, becoming the first athlete to die during an Olympic event. The tragedy cast a shadow over the Games. The following weekend, 23,000 spectators gathered at Stockholm's Olympic Stadium for a memorial service in his honor. The Olympic community, stunned by the loss, raised funds for his widow, collecting the equivalent of $120,000 in modern currency. In Sweden, a monument was placed at the marathon's turning point in Sollentuna, marking the place where Francisco had passed just hours before his collapse. In Lisbon, the impact was deeply felt. A street was named after him, and CF Benfica, one of Portugal's most prominent football clubs, honored him by naming their home stadium in his memory. What was meant to be a moment of national pride had turned into a somber reflection on the dangers of endurance sports. The autopsy confirmed the tragic irony of Francisco's preparation. The very substance meant to protect him had sealed his fate, preventing perspiration and causing a fatal imbalance in his body fluids and electrolytes. His final words before the race, "I will win or die," proved prophetic, though not in the way he had imagined. His death led to increased awareness of heat-related dangers in long-distance running. Future generations of Olympic athletes would benefit from improved safety measures, hydration strategies, and a better understanding of thermoregulation. Yet for Portugal, Francisco Lázaro remains a symbol of both ambition and sacrifice, a man who gave everything in pursuit of his Olympic dream. It was March 4th, 2017. Low clouds pressed against the Juneau ice field as light drizzle fell on the trail leading to Mendenhall Glacier. Beneath the surface, melting ice caves still glowed blue, but the thaw had already started. Daryl Coe, a 41-year-old software engineer from San Jose, California, stood among a group of 8 preparing to enter the glacier's most famous ice cave. In his spare time, Daryl was a dedicated outdoor photographer with hundreds of landscape images published on amateur sites, and a methodical checklist of national parks to conquer. Relatives knew him as quiet, observant, and cautious, the type who researched trail conditions, gear requirements, and optimal lighting angles before every expedition. Daryl preferred solo travel, often saying it eliminated delays and missed photographic opportunities. Alaska had topped his bucket list for years, and these ethereal blue ice caves represented the crown jewel of his week-long solo adventure. He carried his lightweight tripod and mirrorless camera, ready to capture the otherworldly beauty he'd studied in countless online galleries. However, heavy rainfall had pounded the glacier the previous day, increasing surface runoff and weakening ice structures. Still, the licensed tour operator continued with the scheduled cave visit, citing pressure to meet bookings and a lack of official closure orders. 2 guides led the group inside, where centuries-old compressed snow filtered light into shifting shades of cobalt and blue. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling as the group moved deeper inside. One guide reportedly mentioned the ice felt soft today, but they continued the tour. Daryl trailed slightly behind, adjusting his camera settings to capture long exposure shots of the glowing chamber. As the group prepared to exit, disaster struck without warning. A sharp crack echoed through the cavern, followed by a deep, ominous groan. One tourist later described the sound as a tree trunk snapping underwater. Then came a thunderous crash as a massive section of the cave's inner ceiling collapsed catastrophically. The falling ice slab was roughly the size of a van, dislodging in one devastating piece. Daryl stood directly beneath it. The impact was instantaneous and fatal. Witnesses screamed as tons of fractured ice pinned Daryl to the cave floor. One guide collapsed in shock while the other frantically called for emergency assistance via satellite phone. A rescue helicopter was dispatched immediately, arriving within minutes, but there was nothing left to save. Only Daryl's hand protruded from the massive pile of ice and debris. Recovery attempts were deemed too dangerous due to continued cave instability. Authorities suspended all glacier cave tours for 3 weeks, implementing new safety protocols and access restrictions. Daryl's body was finally recovered after a controlled excavation 2 days later. Local authorities and park officials investigated the incident and interviewed the guides and surviving tourists. The tour company was cited for safety violations. Daryl's ashes were returned to California, with a portion later scattered in Yosemite, his favorite park. Friends gathered for a quiet memorial in San Jose, displaying framed photographs from his adventures. It was September 3rd, 2015, in the Dolomites of Washington State. Among the rock formations was the limestone monolith known as Dagger's Edge, its 3,500-foot vertical face jutting out. Rico Alvarez crouched behind his camera equipment, methodically locking the tripod into the bedrock, unaware that the things that would later happen was anything but routine. He had done this dozens of times before. For 3 years, he documented Eric and Jenna Linwood's daring wingsuit flights, capturing their near-impossible stunts from dizzying altitudes. Their YouTube channel had become a cult sensation, part aerial ballet, part Russian roulette. Eric was the showman, cocky, aggressive, always pushing boundaries. Jenna, quieter and methodical, preferred calculations over chaos. Together, they were precision wrapped in madness, their partnership built on trust and an intimate understanding of risk. That morning, the winds were shifting. Jenna had noticed it hours earlier. The wind patterns weren't strong, but they were unpredictable. At breakfast, she'd pointed it to Eric, but his mind was already ready for action. The flight path today was his idea, a razor-line descent, hugging the limestone all the way to a forested ravine. They suited up. Rico zoomed in through his camera lens, watching them do a final tug check on each other. Then Eric stepped to the launch point and jumped off the ledge. The wingsuit inflated instantly, cradling Eric's body into a glide. Rico followed him through the lens. Eric was close to the rock, as planned, just a dozen feet out, skimming the ridgeline. The first few seconds were textbook lines and precise posture. Then it happened. Rico saw it before he heard it. A shift in the trees below, a sudden backward sway. It was almost invisible until its effect hit Eric like a punch from God. His right arm jerked upward violently, wingsuit collapsing on one side. Rico instinctively pulled back the camera to widen his frame. Eric veered left, overcorrected, and his body pitched forward at an unnatural angle. For a fraction of a second, it looked recoverable, until the sound came, a dull, brutal crack that echoed off the rock face like a gunshot. He hit the cliff chest first, bounced off once, then again. Rico lost sight of him as Eric spiraled down through open air, vanishing into the trees like a rag doll. But there was no time to process. Jenna was already behind. Her wings caught the wind cleanly at first, and her descent angle was controlled, but the panic was visible in her adjustments after having seen the accident. Her line is now several degrees off the original vector. She was losing altitude too quickly. Below her, the terrain rose again in jagged outcroppings and a dense patch of pines. She tried to gain elevation by banking right, but her arc was shallow and the wind was uncooperative. From Rico's viewpoint, her legs barely cleared the first tree line before hitting the second. One extended branch caught her left leg. The impact flipped her sideways violently. She slammed against another tree, then pinwheeled through the canopy, vanishing into the foliage below. Rico didn't wait. He grabbed his emergency pack and ran towards them. It took him nearly 40 minutes to reach Jenna. Her wingsuit was shredded along the back, the right arm hanging by threads. Her legs were bent grotesquely and blood soaked under her. She was barely alive. As Rico spoke to 911, her breathing had already stopped. She was declared dead by paramedics airlifted to the site just over an hour later. Eric's body took 2 more days to locate. A helicopter spotted his helmet between 2 ledges. He had died on impact. By the following week, the Linwoods channel had gone dark, every video removed. Rico quietly returned the hard drives to their families and vanished from the wingsuit circuit. He never filmed another flight.
It was August 2014, and 21-year-old Oscar Otero Aguilar was enjoying a night out with friends in Mexico City, celebrating and socializing in the carefree way that young people do when they feel invincible. Oscar was known among his social circle as someone who loved being the center of attention, always ready with a joke or willing to do something outrageous to get a laugh. His Facebook account was filled with bold photos and attention-grabbing posts that showcased his outgoing personality and desire to stand out from the crowd. The 21-year-old had grown up in a working-class neighborhood of Mexico City, where showing toughness and fearlessness was often seen as a mark of respect among young men. Oscar worked at a local auto parts store during the day but lived for his evenings and weekends, when he could hang out with friends and escape the routine of daily life. His social media presence was important to him, and he was always looking for new ways to create dramatic and memorable posts that would impress his followers. That particular evening, Oscar and his friends had been drinking and celebrating at a small gathering when someone brought out a handgun. In Mexico, where gun violence was a serious problem, firearms were unfortunately not uncommon in certain social circles. The group was in a celebratory mood and had been taking various photos throughout the evening, documenting their night out with the kind of casual snapshots that young people share constantly on social media platforms. Oscar was particularly excited about the opportunity to take what he thought would be an edgy and impressive selfie. He had built his online reputation on posting bold and attention-grabbing content, and the presence of the gun seemed like the perfect prop for a dramatic photo that would get reactions from his Facebook friends. None of the group realized the weapon was loaded, treating it as a harmless accessory rather than the deadly instrument it actually was. As the evening progressed and the alcohol continued to flow, Oscar's judgment became increasingly impaired. He decided to pose for what he thought would be the ultimate dramatic selfie, holding the loaded gun to his head in a pose he believed would look tough and impressive. His friends watched as he positioned the weapon against his temple, completely unaware of the tragic consequences that were about to unfold. Oscar held his phone in one hand while pressing the gun against his head with the other, trying to frame the perfect shot that would capture both his face and the weapon in a way that looked dramatic and dangerous. As he attempted to take the selfie, his finger accidentally triggered the gun's mechanism while he was focused on getting the right angle for the photo. The weapon discharged instantly, shooting him in the head at point-blank range. The sound of the gunshot shocked everyone in the room as what had been a fun photo session turned into a horrific accident in the span of seconds. Oscar collapsed immediately, blood pooling around his head as his friends screamed and tried to comprehend what had just happened. Emergency services were called immediately, and Oscar was still alive when paramedics arrived at the scene. The medical team worked frantically to stabilize him and rushed him to the hospital, but his injuries were too severe. He tragically died in the ambulance on the way to receive medical treatment, never making it to the operating room where doctors might have been able to save his life. Mexico's Ministry of Public Security investigated the incident and confirmed the death as accidental, though they also arrested one of Oscar's friends who had been present at the scene. Another friend fled before police could question him, adding to the chaos and confusion surrounding the tragedy. The case became widely reported throughout Mexico and internationally as a stark example of the deadly risks of combining weapons with social media culture. Oscar's death served as a tragic reminder of how the pursuit of dramatic social media content can lead to fatal consequences, especially when combined with alcohol and poor judgment. His story became part of a growing catalog of selfie-related deaths that highlighted the dangerous lengths some people will go to for online attention and validation.
It was September 22, 2018, when the morning mist still clung to Napa Valley's rolling vineyards, that Bobby Chen and Jessica Walsh embarked on what should have been the most romantic day of their lives. Bobby, a 28-year-old software developer from Silicon Valley, possessed the methodical mind of a programmer, but the impulsive heart of a romantic. Standing 5'8" with wire-rimmed glasses, Bobby often made grand gestures without consultation. Jessica Walsh, 26, embodied creative spontaneity as a freelance graphic designer. Her auburn hair and green eyes reflected both artistic vision and underlying anxiety. Having recently relocated from Portland to San Francisco after 2 years of long-distance dating, she struggled with Bobby's controlling tendencies while appreciating his devotion. Her acrophobia made Bobby's surprise balloon proposal both touching and terrifying. The previous evening had erupted into familiar territory, Bobby announcing plans without seeking Jessica's input. She reluctantly agreed to the sunrise balloon ride, hoping to avoid another argument. Bobby had secretly coordinated champagne and roses with the balloon company, convinced romance would conquer Jessica's fear of heights. At 6:15 a.m., their private balloon lifted off with only the pilot accompanying them. The autumn vineyard stretched below like a patchwork quilt in burgundy and gold. Bobby clutched the engagement ring box while Jessica gripped the basket's edge, fighting vertigo. At 400 feet, serenity was shattered. A faulty propane regulator, inadequately maintained despite manufacturer's specifications, allowed unburned gas to accumulate within the balloon's envelope. The pilot, unaware of the invisible danger, attempted routine heating at 6:50 a.m. The accumulated propane ignited instantly, creating a devastating flash fire that consumed the envelope's fabric. Bobby instinctively shielded Jessica, suffering second-degree burns across his face and hands. Jessica inhaled the scorching gases, her respiratory system immediately compromised as consciousness slipped away within 60 seconds. The balloon plummeted toward the vineyard below. Bobby, despite his injuries, held Jessica's unconscious form as smoke filled their lungs. The crash came with merciful swiftness, but smoke inhalation had already claimed both lives before impact. Napa County Emergency Services arrived within 15 minutes. Paramedics found the couple together, Bobby's arms still wrapped protectively around Jessica, the unopened ring box scattered among crushed grapes. Investigation revealed the preventable tragedy. The balloon company immediately grounded its fleet, implementing comprehensive maintenance protocols. The faulty regulator became evidence in wrongful death lawsuits. Bobby's proposal plans died with him, the champagne and roses remaining unopened. Jessica never learned of his intentions, never saw the ring he had chosen after months of consideration. Their families found small comfort knowing they died together, their final moments spent in each other's arms above the valley they had come to celebrate their love. On September 5, 1972, the Munich Olympics had entered their second week. The Olympic Village, designed to symbolize Germany's peaceful re-emergence, stood in stark contrast to the propaganda-fueled spectacle of the 1936 Berlin Games. But the illusion of harmony would soon be shattered. For David Berger, a 28-year-old American-Israeli weightlifter, the competition had ended days earlier. Though eliminated in the early rounds, he remained in the village to support his teammates, a decision that would ultimately seal his fate. David had grown up in Shaker Heights, Ohio, excelling in both academics and athletics. At Tulane University, he won an NCAA weightlifting title while maintaining honors status, later earning advanced degrees from Columbia University. His passion for the sport led him to emigrate to Israel in the early 1970s, where he quickly made a name for himself, winning silver at the 1971 Asian Games. Engaged to an Israeli student, he was building a future both in and beyond weightlifting. In the pre-dawn hours of September 5th, silence blanketed the Olympic Village, a cluster of low-rise apartment buildings housing athletes from around the world. The Israeli team resided at 31 Connollystrasse, a modest, white-walled complex with balconies overlooking the walkways below. Inside, some shared dormitory-style rooms, while others had small private spaces. Around 4:30 a.m., 8 armed members of Black September, a Palestinian militant group, scaled the perimeter fence and slipped into the village. Disguised as athletes, they carried duffel bags filled with weapons and moved swiftly, using stolen keys to infiltrate the Israeli quarters. The first to sense danger was Yosef Gutfreund, a wrestling referee. A faint noise outside stirred him awake. Peering through the dimly lit hallway, he spotted masked men with rifles advancing toward the door. Instinct took over. He threw his weight against it, desperately trying to hold them back. The struggle was brief but valiant. Outnumbered and overpowered, he could only manage a warning shout before the intruders forced their way inside. The gunmen moved with deadly efficiency. Wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg charged at them, attempting to disarm one of the attackers. A gunshot rang out. He staggered back, wounded, but still defiant. Under duress, he was forced to lead the militants through the building in search of more Israelis. Hoping to save lives, he deliberately bypassed some doors, but his efforts could only go so far. Moments later, he was executed. Yosef Romano, another weightlifter, was next to fight back. He lunged at a gunman, grabbing for his weapon. A second militant opened fire, striking him down. His body was left in the hallway, a gruesome warning to the others. The remaining Israelis, including David, were rounded up, bound with rope, and crammed into a small room under armed guard. In the chaos, David had been shot in the shoulder. His wound remained untreated as the terrorists solidified their control. Their demands were clear: the release of 234 Palestinian prisoners. As the sun rose, the world awoke to the unfolding crisis. Television cameras broadcast images from the village, yet for hours, Olympic events continued, as if the horror beyond the stadium walls did not exist. Only later did officials suspend the games. West German authorities, unprepared for such an unprecedented hostage situation, scrambled for a response. They negotiated, offering the terrorists safe passage to Cairo in exchange for the athletes' release. A plan was hastily devised. At Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base, where the exchange would take place, police officers disguised as crew members would ambush the gunmen. But the operation unraveled before it even began. Determining the mission too risky, the officers abandoned their positions without engaging the attackers. The terrorists, along with their hostages, were transported from the Olympic Village to Fürstenfeldbruck via military helicopters. Upon arrival, the gunmen quickly realized they had been deceived. Enraged, they opened fire. Chaos erupted on the tarmac. One of the terrorists turned his rifle toward the helicopters where the Israeli hostages were restrained. David, already wounded, took 2 more bullets to the legs. Then, in a final horrific act, A terrorist threw a grenade into one of the helicopters. The explosion engulfed the cabin in flames. Trapped inside, David and his teammates perished from smoke inhalation and fire. All 11 Israeli hostages were killed. The Munich Games, intended to be a symbol of unity through sport, instead became a site of unimaginable tragedy. David's body was returned to Cleveland, where he was laid to rest in his hometown. His death led to the creation of the David Berger National Memorial, a 14-foot-tall sculpture of broken Olympic rings, symbolizing the interrupted games. 11 segments represent each of the fallen athletes, one slightly different, honoring David's unique journey from Ohio to Israel. It was June 22, 2015. The night air in Tainan, Taiwan pulsed with thundering drums, exploding firecrackers, and thick clouds of incense. Villagers packed narrow roads around a rural temple, their faces glowing crimson from flame arcs overhead. It was a purification ceremony, colorful, deafening, and that night, catastrophically overloaded. Harriet No, a 33-year-old dental hygienist from Perth, Australia, had recently ended a long-term relationship and embarked on a solo cultural journey through Southeast Asia. Reserved but adventurous, she was fascinated by Taiwan's layered traditions and vibrant street life. She avoided tourist resorts, preferring homestays to connect authentically with locals. She'd researched Taiwanese customs extensively, learning basic Mandarin phrases and studying festival traditions. Her Tainan Airbnb host, an elderly woman, had encouraged her to attend that evening's temple procession, a small neighborhood event tourists rarely discovered. Harriet brought her phone and shoulder bag, excited to photograph what she called the real Taiwan. The main attraction was the fire tunnel, a ceremonial walkway flanked by towering arches of sparklers, Roman candles, and fire fountains. Locals walked through barefoot or with wet towels draped over their heads, symbolically cleansing themselves through spiritual fire. Volunteers handed Harriet a damp towel and gestured for her to join the slow-moving procession line. The air was already thick with gunpowder haze as Harriet hesitated briefly, then stepped confidently under the first blazing arch. She'd likely witnessed similar rituals online and trusted the organizers' experience. What she didn't know was that safety had been compromised. Cheap wiring was used after a fuse repair, and crowd barriers had been removed to speed up foot traffic. In the context of informal or loosely regulated public events, especially in smaller towns or rural areas, this is unfortunately normal. And midway through the tunnel, an overhead launcher, mounted too low and catastrophically overloaded, burst off angle, sending a cluster of live shells directly into the crowd. One spark struck a man wearing a synthetic oil-stained jacket. Witnesses saw a sudden whoosh of flame as fire spread across his clothing. The man screamed and spun wildly into the procession, flames spreading from person to person like falling dominoes. Panic erupted instantly. People shoved and stumbled as firework tubes collapsed from their unstable mounts. Harriet, trapped near the tunnel's center, was caught in the human stampede. Someone slammed into her from behind with devastating force. She lost her footing and fell hard onto the concrete, her protective towel slipping away. As panicked crowds surged past, she was trampled repeatedly. A fallen spark ignited her cotton blouse, and within seconds her upper body was engulfed in flames. Eyewitnesses said she tried desperately to rise, one arm shielding her face from the inferno. Her screams pierced the tunnel but were lost in the roar of continuing fireworks. Several bystanders attempted rescue, but intense heat and the ongoing stampede made approach impossible. She stopped screaming after 20 seconds. Standby fire volunteers eventually extinguished the blaze with buckets of water and emergency blankets, but it was too late for Harriet. Her body was removed before dawn as authorities sealed the site and launched a criminal investigation. 2 volunteer firework handlers were arrested for gross negligence. Local news footage showed charred prayer flags and melted PVC frames, remnants of sacred tradition turned lethal. Harriet's remains were flown back to Australia in a sealed container due to the extent of her injuries. A closed casket funeral was held in Perth, with former patients and co-workers filling the small chapel to capacity.
It was October 25, 2018, and married couple Meenakshi Murthy and Vishnu Viswanath were exploring Yosemite National Park as part of their ongoing documentation of America's most beautiful natural landmarks. The 30 and 29-year-old software engineers from India had built a popular travel blog called Holidays and Happily Ever Afters, sharing their adventures with thousands of Instagram followers who loved their stunning photography from dangerous and scenic locations around the world. Meenakshi and Vishnu had met in college and bonded over their shared love of travel and photography. After moving to the United States for work, they had spent their weekends and vacations exploring national parks, always seeking the most dramatic and photogenic viewpoints. Their Instagram account featured breathtaking images from cliff edges, mountain peaks, and other precarious locations that required careful planning and considerable risk-taking. The couple was known among their followers for pushing boundaries to capture the perfect shot, often posing near cliff edges and dangerous viewpoints that made viewers nervous just looking at the photos. Ironically, Meenakshi had previously written about selfie dangers on their blog, asking, "Is our life worth just a photo?" But the pursuit of spectacular content for their growing social media presence seemed to override their awareness of the risks involved. Their Yosemite trip was planned as a multi-day photography expedition, with Taft Point being one of their most anticipated locations. The scenic overlook was famous among photographers for its unobstructed views and lack of safety railings, allowing for dramatic photos that appeared to show people suspended in midair above the valley floor 800 feet below. On that fateful afternoon, Meenakshi and Vishnu set up their camera on a tripod at Taft Point, carefully positioning themselves near the cliff edge for what they hoped would be their most spectacular selfie yet. Other visitors watched as they arranged their shot, adjusting the camera angle and testing different poses to achieve the perfect composition. The couple appeared confident and experienced, showing no signs of concern about the dangerous location. They activated the camera's timer function and moved into position for their final photo, standing close together near the edge of the cliff with the vast Yosemite Valley stretching out behind them. As the camera counted down to capture the image, something went wrong. Whether they lost their balance, stepped too close to the edge, or were affected by wind, both Meenakshi and Vishnu fell together off the cliff. Their camera continued recording, capturing the moments before and after their fatal fall. Other visitors who witnessed the tragedy immediately called for help, but there was nothing that could be done. The couple had fallen 800 feet to the valley floor below, and the impact was instantly fatal. The National Park Service recovered their bodies and confirmed that they had died from the trauma of the fall. Their camera and tripod were found exactly where they had set them up, containing the final photos and videos that documented their last moments. The images showed their excitement and anticipation, completely unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. Their deaths became international news and sparked renewed discussions about selfie culture and the extreme risks people take for social media content. Their story was widely cited as an example of how the pursuit of the perfect photo can lead to fatal consequences even for experienced travelers who understood the dangers involved.
It was July 8, 2021, when the morning mist began to roll across the Loire Valley, setting the stage for a tragedy that would claim 2 lives and destroy a company's last hope for survival. Richard Sterling, 52, had built his reputation as a visionary CEO who believed in grand gestures and bold moves. Standing 6 feet tall with graying temples and an expensive suit that masked his company's dire financial situation, Richard possessed the kind of charismatic confidence that had once attracted millions in venture capital. However, his tech startup was hemorrhaging money, and his penchant for costly decisions had pushed the company to the brink of bankruptcy. Despite mounting pressure, Richard maintained his belief that projecting success was essential to securing the emergency funding they desperately needed. Jennifer Adams, 44, served as the company's chief financial officer and had become Richard's most vocal critic during their financial crisis. A meticulous woman with sharp features and an analytical mind, Jennifer had been working 16-hour days for months, desperately trying to keep the company afloat while Richard continued making expensive decisions. Her auburn hair was often pulled back in a tight bun, reflecting her no-nonsense approach to business. She had reluctantly joined this corporate retreat to France, viewing it as another wasteful expense they couldn't afford. The tension between them had reached a breaking point when Richard insisted on booking a private hot air balloon experience over the Loire Valley Chateau. Jennifer had objected vehemently, arguing that every dollar mattered when they were weeks away from bankruptcy. Richard dismissed her concerns, claiming the retreat was essential for demonstrating company stability to potential investors who might be watching their every move. Their private balloon launched at 7:30 that morning, carrying only the pilot, Richard and Jennifer above the picturesque valley dotted with medieval castles. Jennifer had planned to use this forced private time to convince Richard to consider selling the company before they lost everything. The morning started beautifully, with clear skies offering stunning views of the historic chateau below. At 400 feet altitude, morning fog began forming in the valley with alarming speed. Within 15 minutes, visibility dropped to less than 200 meters, transforming the scenic flight into a dangerous situation. The pilot, who lacked sufficient training for low visibility conditions, became disoriented in the thick fog at 8:15. Attempting to find a safe landing site, the pilot inadvertently descended toward a forested hillside. The balloon basket struck tree branches during an uncontrolled descent through the forest canopy. Richard suffered severe lacerations across his face and torso, along with a broken arm, as branches tore through the basket's sides. Jennifer was thrown from the basket when it caught on a large oak tree 30 feet above ground. She fell through the branches, suffering fatal head and neck injuries upon impact with the forest floor below. The basket remained suspended in the tree with Richard trapped inside, his injuries causing severe blood loss. For 2 agonizing hours, Richard remained conscious but unable to escape the suspended basket. His expensive suit became soaked with blood as he slowly succumbed to his injuries, dying before French emergency services could reach the remote crash site. French rescue teams located the wreckage using cell phone GPS data after the executives failed to return to their hotel. The investigation revealed that the pilot should have delayed the flight until the fog cleared, lacking proper certification for low visibility operations. The tragedy's aftermath proved devastating for the struggling tech startup. With both key executives dead, pending investor negotiations collapsed immediately. The company declared bankruptcy within weeks, as no potential buyers emerged willing to acquire a business that had lost its entire leadership team. Employees were left jobless, and investors lost millions, making the Loire Valley balloon crash not just a personal tragedy, but a corporate disaster that destroyed dozens of careers and dreams, along with 2 lives. It was March 9, 2016. The Bering Sea's winds carried that familiar Arctic bite, sharp enough to cut through even the most carefully laid plans. Brielle and Aaron Torrance, both 26, stood at the edge of their 4th day traversing the ice from Cape Prince of Wales toward the ghosted outline of Chukotka, Russia, unaware of how hostile the terrain was going to be that day. They weren't thrill-seekers, this was calculated. Brielle, once a collegiate rower and now an ultramarathoner, had trained obsessively for this crossing, logging months in altitude chambers, learning ice fracture patterns, sleeping in chest-deep snow pits. Aaron had done the same, matching her stride for stride in the preparation. Their sleds carried rations, GPS, 2 beacons, military-rated survival gear. They'd planned every step, every variable. But the Arctic has a way of creating variables faster than they can be planned for. Around mid-morning, roughly 15 miles from the Alaskan coast, they ran into a wall of broken sea ice, a jagged ridge where massive chunks had piled up and frozen into a wall, stretching nearly half a mile in each direction. It seemed harmless, but there was no way through. They debated briefly, then split to scout, Brielle heading left, Aaron right. The plan was simple: stay within visual range, radio if needed, regroup within 20 minutes. Aaron kept his eyes on her for as long as he could, tracking her movement between rising chunks of wind-polished ice. Brielle's red parka was a bright pinprick against the endless white. Then the wind changed. Within minutes, the air thickened and visibility plummeted. A whiteout descended, fast, dense, disorienting. The world became noise and brightness. He called her name into the gale, then he heard a scream. It was Brielle, maybe 100 yards away. Aaron moved fast, skiing low to the ground to follow her trail. For 20 minutes, he hunted through the noise, then he saw it. The tip of her ski sticking up awkwardly near a narrow ice gap. He reached her moments later. She'd fallen through a break between slabs. Her right leg had caught on an upright shard of blue ice, deep puncture, bleeding heavily. Her ski was twisted beneath her body. A red fan of blood painted the snow around her. She was breathing, conscious, and trying to move. He acted immediately. Tourniquet with his belt, sleds dragged side by side to build a windbreak, and emergency blankets wrapped around her. He stacked their gear into an improvised trench. He tried activating the beacon, but there was no signal. It required line of sight, and the storm showed no signs of breaking. Brielle drifted in and out. He pressed their parkas around her and checked her pulse repeatedly, watching it slow in stuttering degrees. But hypothermia doesn't arrive with ceremony, it creeps. During the wait, she stopped shivering. Her eyes closed, then opened less frequently. Eventually, she didn't respond at all. When visibility returned at dusk, he activated the beacon. It was 8 hours before the Coast Guard reached them by air. They found him still crouched over her, shielding her body, but she was declared dead on sight. A year later, Aaron returned alone. He finished the route they'd started, carrying her compass in his parka and her wedding ring in a sealed chest pocket. It was November 3, 2021, when 3 American college friends embarked on what should have been the adventure of a lifetime in Luxor, Egypt. Amanda Torres, a 22-year-old archaeology senior at UCLA, had meticulously planned this graduation celebration trip. Her infectious enthusiasm for ancient civilizations had drawn her 2 closest friends into sharing her dream of exploring Egypt together. As someone who spent countless hours researching pharaohs and pyramids, Amanda possessed an adventurous spirit that perfectly complemented her academic dedication. Michael O'Brien, 23, brought his mechanical engineering background to their group dynamic. Having recently completed his degree, the methodical young man had developed a fascination with ancient Egyptian construction techniques. His analytical nature often served as a counterbalance to Amanda's spontaneous energy, though he rarely voiced concerns that might dampen his friend's excitement. Priya Patel, the youngest at 21, had worked tirelessly at a campus coffee shop for 2 years, saving every spare dollar to afford this journey. An art history major with an eye for beauty, she approached their Egyptian adventure with quiet determination and genuine appreciation for the cultural significance of everything they encountered. The hot air balloon ride over the Valley of the Kings represented Amanda's absolute must-do experience. Michael had noticed concerning wear on the wicker basket during pre-flight inspection, observing frayed edges and questionable cable connections. However, not wanting to disappoint his friends, he kept his engineering concerns to himself. At exactly 6 a.m., their balloon lifted off with 10 other tourists aboard. The initial ascent provided breathtaking views of ancient temples, the meandering Nile River, and the golden desert landscape. Amanda pressed against the basket edge, camera in hand, while Priya sketched impressions in her travel journal. Michael quietly monitored the basket's behavior during their climb. At 600 feet, disaster struck without warning. Metal fatigue from repeated stress cycles caused catastrophic failure in the basket's support cables. At 6:35 a.m., one corner of the passenger compartment separated completely from the balloon envelope above. The basket tilted at a dangerous 30-degree angle, creating chaos among passengers. Amanda, positioned near the failed corner, fell through the widening gap between basket sections. She plummeted 400 feet, striking the rocky terrain below with fatal impact. Michael desperately grabbed onto the remaining structure, but could only maintain his grip for 30 seconds before gravitational forces overwhelmed him. His fall resulted in fatal injuries upon impact. Priya managed to hold on throughout the terrifying descent, surviving until the emergency landing. However, the high-speed impact of the tilted basket against the ground caused severe internal injuries that proved fatal, despite immediate medical attention. Egyptian emergency services reached the crash site within 1 hour using desert rescue vehicles. Investigation revealed the balloon operator had been using passenger baskets well beyond their recommended service life. Without proper structural inspections, the company had prioritized profit margins over passenger safety. The tragedy prompted immediate regulatory changes throughout Egypt's tourism industry. New requirements mandated annual structural certification for all passenger baskets used in commercial operations, ensuring future adventurers would not face the same preventable dangers. Amanda, Michael, and Priya had traveled thousands of miles to witness ancient wonders, only to become victims of modern negligence. Their story serves as a sobering reminder that adventure tourism requires rigorous safety standards to protect those seeking extraordinary experiences. It was August 26, 1960, at the Rome Summer Olympics. where temperatures soared to 104 degrees Fahrenheit under an unforgiving Italian sun. Among the competitors was Knud Enemark Jensen, a 23-year-old Danish cyclist preparing for the grueling 62-mile team time trial. A rising talent, he had won the individual cycling Nordic Championship earlier that year. His ties to Olympic greatness ran deep. He was married to the niece of former Olympic gold medalist Henry Hansen. The Rome Olympics proved brutal for endurance athletes. The time trial course stretched across mountainous terrain with no shade, forcing cyclists to endure relentless heat for hours. Even before the race began, concerns swirled about the extreme weather conditions, yet 68 cyclists lined up at the start, determined to push through for Olympic glory. Jensen and his Danish teammates maintained a steady rhythm in the early stages of the race, but the heat soon took its toll. One of their teammates collapsed from heat exhaustion and dropped out. Under Olympic rules, all 3 remaining Danish cyclists needed to finish for the team to avoid disqualification. The pressure mounted as they continued their punishing ride. With just 5 miles to go, Jensen began showing signs of distress. He told his teammates he felt dizzy, his movements growing erratic. One of them doused him with water in an attempt to cool him down. For a moment he seemed to recover, but when they let go, he collapsed. The fall was devastating. Jensen struck his head on the pavement, fracturing his skull. Emergency personnel rushed him to a military tent near the finish line, but conditions inside were even worse. The temperature within the tent soared to 122 degrees Fahrenheit, offering no reprieve. Jensen never regained consciousness. Hours later, he was pronounced dead. The tragedy quickly sparked controversy. The Danish team's trainer, Olaf Jorgensen, admitted to giving Jensen and his teammates Ronia-Kol, a vasodilator used to widen blood vessels and increase circulation. This revelation fueled widespread speculation about possible amphetamine use. However, initial autopsy results found no traces of drugs in Jensen's system. The full autopsy, conducted by 3 Italian doctors, was never made public, adding to the mystery. Years later, one of the doctors claimed they had detected several substances, including amphetamines, but this was later denied by authorities. Official reports from both Danish and Olympic officials attributed Jensen's death to heat stroke and the skull fracture from his fall. Beyond the immediate controversy, Jensen's death had lasting consequences. In response, the International Olympic Committee established its medical commission in 1961, laying the foundation for modern sports drug testing. By 1968, both the Winter and Summer Olympics had implemented formal anti-doping measures. The military tent where Jensen spent his final moments became a symbol of the inadequate medical facilities at major sporting events. His case highlighted the need for better emergency response systems, particularly in extreme conditions. It was November 3, 2016. The Victoria Nile glistened under late morning sun as an aluminum tour skiff glided silently through Murchison Falls National Park. Tourists leaned forward with cameras raised, hushed by their guide's stern warnings. In this stretch of river, silence wasn't just respectful, it was survival. Jeremy Fields, a 37-year-old produce wholesaler from Flagstaff, Arizona, had finally taken his first real vacation as an adult. A single father of 2 boys, he'd booked this 10-day East African adventure on impulse. A birthday gift to himself, featuring safaris, hiking, and river tours. Friends described Jeremy as athletic and good-humored, but known for dismissing what he called nervous energy. He respected rules but bristled at being told what not to do. Jeremy wasn't reckless by nature, just confident. He'd researched Uganda extensively, reading about wildlife encounters and safety protocols. But like many first-time visitors to Africa, he underestimated the lethal reality behind the postcard scenery. His social media showed typical tourist excitement, photos of elephants, landscapes, and smiling selfies with local guides. That morning, Jeremy boarded a mid-sized skiff with 12 other tourists, Americans, British, and Germans, plus a local Ugandan guide and boat operator. Their route followed the Victoria Nile toward the legendary Murchison Falls. As they approached a shaded inlet, the guide delivered quiet but firm instructions. Remain seated, stay silent, and avoid startling hippos at all costs. The group nodded obediently as cameras were lifted quietly, but Jeremy wanted something more dramatic, footage that would impress friends back home. As the skiff drifted within view of a half-submerged hippo herd, He stood slowly and raised his phone to record. Then he whistled sharply, trying to provoke a reaction. Someone hissed, "Don't." Jeremy ignored them, clapping loudly and laughing as he attempted to make the hippos lift their heads or yawn for his video. The guide spun around, ordering him to sit down immediately. Jeremy refused. Without warning, a massive bull hippo exploded from beneath the surface just 20 feet from the port side. Witnesses described it as a missile from nowhere. The animal's jaws clamped onto the boat's edge with devastating force, sending a thunderous crack across the water. The vessel lurched violently, throwing Jeremy backward into the murky river. Passengers screamed as the guide grabbed his rifle. Jeremy surfaced, coughing and paddling desperately against the current. But within seconds, the enraged hippo returned with lethal intent. It charged from below, jaws opening impossibly wide, and bit down across Jeremy's chest and torso in one crushing motion. One witness saw his upper body lift violently from the water before disappearing in a churning swirl of red. The guide fired a warning shot skyward. The hippo submerged. Jeremy never resurfaced. Called by the native guides, park rangers arrived within an hour, but recovery efforts proved futile. 3 hours later, partial remains, his left leg and shredded clothing, were found downstream. Rangers issued renewed safety bulletins warning of the extreme territorial aggression of Nile hippos and the importance of remaining seated and quiet during river tours. The park also began requiring all boat operators to complete updated wildlife hazard training before leading tourist excursions. Jeremy's body was flown home to Arizona in a sealed casket. His sons, aged 9 and 11, were told there had been an accident. A small memorial was held in Flagstaff, attended by friends and family who remembered his adventurous spirit. It was August 14, 2017, a Saturday morning in the Canadian Rockies. The Razorback Divide stretched across Banff National Park. 29-year-old Nolan Chase adjusted his pack straps, unaware that in this unforgiving wilderness, a tragedy was about to unfold that would haunt the search and rescue community forever. Nolan's world was built on precision, strengthened by military discipline, and softened by a deep love for the adrenaline-inducing outdoors. The former Army combat medic moved through life with the same calm he'd shown under fire in Afghanistan. But recently, something new had crept into Nolan's carefully ordered world, an irresistible pull toward the unexplored. It wasn't the mountains themselves that captivated Nolan after settling in Alberta, but the windows they opened to places unmarked on any recreational map. He'd found his calling with local search and rescue teams, or SAR, where he met Rachel Danner, a veteran SAR lead with over 2 decades of experience. Rachel saw potential in Nolan's calm, his fitness, his refusal to take shortcuts. But one habit always worried her: Nolan's tendency to deviate for exploration, especially when photographing unmapped ledges and glacial pockets. When he told her about his solo attempt on the Razorback Divide, she hesitated. The route was notorious: shifting snowfields, unpredictable weather, increased bear activity. She warned him plainly. He assured her he'd accounted for everything: flare gun, bear spray, Kevlar backpack, pre-logged check-ins. Rachel knew he was capable, but something in her gut whispered warnings. That evening, when Nolan missed his scheduled check-in, Rachel was already watching the radar. A storm system had rolled in fast, and by midnight she had a 6-person team flown into the high basin. The next morning, through binoculars, she spotted movement on a high slope. Nolan, setting a small tent on a narrow, snowy ledge beneath a jagged rock outcrop, unaware that the location would be his undoing. The sequence that occurred next happened fast. They saw a motion from the tree line, a flicker in the brush, branches swaying unnaturally, then snapping under pressure. It started as a blur, but resolved into the heavy frame of a grizzly, low, fast, and tracking with purpose. The bear had likely been pushed lower by the incoming storm, seeking shelter or scavenging for food in the thinning snowpack. Nolan's movements, the scent of food or sweat, or even the noise of setting camp could have drawn it in. Rachel bore witness as the bear, close to 500 pounds, emerged near Nolan's camp within 30 yards and closing fast. There was no warning, only the realization that it was already too close. According to the SAR team that witnessed what followed, Nolan spun around, flare gun in hand. The first shot fired wide, flying harmlessly into the thin air. He scrambled for his pack, likely reaching for bear spray, but the bear was already rushing. He turned and ran down slope, but his snow boots weren't made for fast descents. He was stumbling as he fought for balance on the treacherous slope. Each second gave the bear more ground than Nolan could afford to lose. The bear accelerated. Nolan's boot slipped, and he lost his footing completely. The SAR team watched helplessly through binoculars as he slid over the edge of a glacial chute, tumbling into the white void below. The bear followed, also disappearing into the team's sight. What followed was out of view, but not out of imagination. 2 hours later, the team reached the site. When they arrived where Nolan had been, the snow was torn apart, streaked with blood and fabric chunks. They followed destruction, claw marks in snow, blood-soaked drag lines leading to a crevasse rim. There were no signs of Nolan's body, just more blood disappearing into a narrow chute dropping into the glacier below. His beacon had stopped transmitting during the attack, presumably broken from the fall. Over 3 days, teams rappelled into crevices and probed snowfields, but the mountain had swallowed him completely. Nolan was declared missing, presumed dead, on August 17th. The team later said the worst part wasn't the bear or the fall. It was watching from a few hundred yards away, close enough to see every second, too far to intervene. It was February 12th, 2010, at the Whistler Sliding Center, where the ice glistened under the Canadian morning light. Hours before the Winter Olympics opening ceremony, 21-year-old Nodar Kumaritashvili prepared for his final training run. The Georgian luger had already completed 25 runs on the track, yet its reputation loomed over competitors. Whistler was the fastest luge course ever built, and even the most experienced sliders approached it with caution. Nodar had spent years preparing for this moment. He was born in Bakuriani, Georgia, a mountain town where luge was more than just a sport, it was a family tradition. His grandfather, Aleko, had pioneered the sport in Soviet Georgia, building the country's first luge run in 1970. His father, David, had been a USSR youth champion, and his uncle, Felix, headed the Georgian Luge Federation. At 13, Nodar began training under their guidance, balancing intense practice with his economic studies at Georgian Technical University. His Olympic debut was supposed to be a proud continuation of that legacy. Long before the Games began, concerns about the Whistler track had surfaced. Speeds exceeded expectations, with some runs reaching 95 miles per hour, 6 miles per hour faster than originally designed. Josef Fendt, president of the International Luge Federation, had warned track officials a year earlier about the alarming speeds, but the course remained unchanged. That morning, Nodar launched from the men's start, as he had many times before. His sled carved through the ice with precision, reaching a speed of 89 miles per hour. He maneuvered the early turns with control, but as he neared the final curve, something went wrong. His sled wobbled, lifting slightly off the track. In a fraction of a second, he lost control. Nodar was thrown from his sled, hurtling off the track and into a steel support pole near the finish line. The impact was catastrophic. He suffered severe head and neck trauma, rendering him unconscious on impact. Medical teams rushed to his side, performing CPR in a desperate attempt to revive him before airlifting him to a nearby hospital. 50 minutes after the crash, Nodar was pronounced dead, the first luge fatality in Olympic competition since 1975. The news stunned the Olympic community. The Georgian delegation, devastated by the loss, considered withdrawing from the Games. Instead, they chose to compete in Nodar's honor. That evening, during the opening ceremony, the 7 remaining Georgian athletes marched with black armbands, leaving an empty space in their formation. The Olympic and Canadian flags were lowered to half-mast, and a moment of silence marked the tragedy. In the aftermath, track officials scrambled to make adjustments. The walls at Curve 16's exit were raised, and the ice profile was altered. The men's start was moved to the women's position to reduce speeds, though Olympic officials insisted the changes were not for safety reasons, but to accommodate the emotional toll on the athletes. However, the International Luge Federation's later report confirmed what many had feared. The track had been faster than intended. Nodar's body was returned to Georgia, where thousands gathered for his funeral. In Bakuriani, the street where he had grown up was renamed in his memory. Felix Loch, the German luger who won gold that year, had his medal melted down and reformed into 2 discs, one of which was engraved with Nodar's image and given to his family. His death forced changes in luge track design. The course built for the 2014 Sochi Olympics featured 2 uphill sections to slow speeds, making runs roughly 10 miles per hour slower than Whistler. While these adjustments made the sport safer, they came at an immeasurable cost. For Nodar's family and his country, the games that were meant to be his greatest triumph became a painful reminder of all that was lost.
It was January 19th, 2019, and 36-year-old Gigi Wu was preparing for another solo climbing adventure in Taiwan's Yushan National Park, known internationally as the Bikini Climber. Gigi had built a massive social media following by taking provocative selfies in bikinis atop mountain summits over 13,000 feet high. Her unique combination of serious mountaineering skills and eye-catching photography had earned her thousands of followers who eagerly awaited each new post from her daring adventures. Despite her provocative online persona, Gigi was a highly experienced and safety-conscious climber who always wore proper gear during her ascents. She had completed over 100 successful climbs throughout Asia, including some of the region's most challenging peaks. Her routine was always the same: climb in full winter gear, reach the summit safely, quickly change into a bikini for photos, then immediately return to proper clothing for the descent. Gigi's friends and fellow climbers respected her technical skills and knowledge of mountain safety protocols. She carried satellite communication devices, emergency supplies, and always filed detailed climbing plans with local authorities. Her social media posts often included safety tips and warnings about the dangers of mountain climbing, despite the seemingly reckless nature of her signature bikini photos. This particular trek to Taiwan's tallest mountains was meant to be another routine adventure for her popular Instagram account. Gigi had climbed in this area multiple times before and was familiar with the terrain and weather patterns. She had checked conditions carefully and planned her route to avoid the most dangerous sections during the winter season. The climb began successfully as Gigi made steady progress up the mountain, documenting her journey with regular photos and GPS updates. She reached the summit without incident and took her signature bikini selfie, quickly changing back into her winter gear as temperatures dropped below freezing. The descent started normally, but tragedy struck when she slipped on an icy section and fell into a deep ravine. Unable to move due to serious injuries from the fall, Gigi managed to use her satellite phone to call for help and alert rescue services to her location. She provided detailed coordinates and described her condition, but weather conditions were rapidly deteriorating as a winter storm moved into the area. Rescue teams were dispatched immediately, but faced dangerous conditions that prevented them from reaching her quickly. As hours passed, hypothermia began setting in while Gigi waited for rescue in the freezing ravine. She made several more calls to update rescuers on her condition, but her voice grew weaker with each conversation. The rescue teams worked frantically to reach her location, but the combination of harsh weather, difficult terrain, and approaching darkness made progress extremely slow. Despite the heroic efforts of rescue teams, Gigi succumbed to hypothermia before they could reach her location. Her death shocked her thousands of followers who had watched her daring adventures for years, many of whom had never considered the real dangers behind her spectacular photos. The incident sparked widespread debates about the risks of extreme selfie culture and the responsibility of social media influencers to promote safety. Mountain rescue organizations used Gigi's case to emphasize the importance of proper safety measures and backup plans, even for experienced climbers. Her story became a cautionary tale about how even the most skilled adventurers can fall victim to unexpected circumstances, and how the pursuit of social media content should never compromise basic safety protocols.
It was June 12, 2018, when the morning sky over Cappadocia, Turkey, became the backdrop for a tragedy that would forever change hot air balloon tourism operations. Michael Chang, a 41-year-old professional travel photographer from San Francisco, had built his reputation capturing breathtaking landscapes worldwide. Known for his patient teaching style and infectious enthusiasm, Michael specialized in leading photography workshops to spectacular locations. His calm demeanor and technical expertise had earned him a loyal following among amateur photographers seeking to elevate their craft. Lisa Rodriguez, 33, worked as a graphic designer in Miami's bustling advertising district, but dreamed of becoming a professional photographer. After years of weekend shoots in the Everglades and Florida Keys, she had enrolled in Michael's Cappadocia workshop, hoping to transition careers. During their week exploring the region's otherworldly rock formations and ancient cave churches, Lisa had impressed Michael with her artistic eye and dedication to learning advanced techniques. The workshop group had spent 7 intensive days mastering golden hour lighting and composition while photographing Cappadocia's unique geological features. Michael had saved the hot air balloon flight for their final morning, promising his 6 students an unparalleled opportunity to capture the landscape from 800 feet above the fairy chimneys and volcanic valleys. At 5:30 a.m., their balloon lifted off alongside over 100 other tourist balloons in Cappadocia's signature morning spectacle. The pre-dawn timing was crucial for optimal lighting conditions, but it created dangerous air traffic congestion that Turkish authorities struggled to manage during peak tourist season. As their balloon reached 800 feet, shifting wind patterns pushed the massive inflated envelopes closer together than safety protocols recommended. Michael was adjusting his camera settings to capture the sea of colorful balloons when he noticed their balloon drifting dangerously close to another tourist basket carrying 16 passengers. At exactly 6 a.m., the collision occurred with devastating force. The wind-driven impact caused both balloon envelopes to tear and lose critical lift capacity. Michael was struck by debris from the other balloon's wicker basket, suffering severe head trauma that rendered him unconscious immediately. The violent collision threw Lisa from their basket, sending her plummeting 600 feet toward the rocky terrain below. Emergency services, well practiced in responding to balloon incidents in the high-traffic tourist area, arrived within minutes of the crash. However, both photographers had already sustained fatal injuries beyond medical intervention. Michael died from head trauma during transport to the regional hospital, while Lisa died instantly upon impact with the volcanic rock formations she had spent the week learning to photograph. Investigation revealed critical gaps in air traffic management during peak tourist season. With over 100 balloons launching simultaneously each morning, existing separation protocols proved inadequate for preventing dangerous mid-air encounters. The tragedy exposed how commercial pressure to maximize tourist flights had compromised safety margins. Turkish aviation authorities responded by implementing comprehensive air traffic management systems specifically designed for mass balloon operations. New protocols established mandatory separation distances, reduced simultaneous launches, and created designated flight corridors to prevent future collisions. Michael's photography equipment, recovered from the crash site, contained his final images of the Cappadocia sunrise that had drawn him to this remarkable landscape. Lisa's camera held her last shots of the balloon-filled sky she had dreamed of capturing professionally. The Cappadocia tourist collision became a watershed moment for balloon safety worldwide, leading to stricter oversight of commercial flight activities in scenic destinations where photography tourism intersects with adventure travel. It was October 11, 2018. The afternoon heat in Marrakesh had begun to fade, but the Medina pulsed with relentless energy. In the souks, vendors shouted over bright stalls as spice and exhaust filled the narrow air. Down a lesser-known alley, unmarked on any tourist map, a group of travelers had taken a turn that would change everything. Cole Hampton, a 24-year-old ventilation system apprentice from Winnipeg, Canada, was exploring with 2 high school friends during their 2-week budget adventure through Morocco and Tunisia. Cole was the group's natural leader, outgoing, fearless, and always eager to connect with locals. He prided himself on avoiding tourist traps, constantly seeking the authentic experience that guidebooks couldn't provide. Friends relied on him to negotiate prices, navigate cultural barriers, and diffuse tense situations with his infectious humor. Cole had spent weeks researching Moroccan culture, learning basic Arabic phrases, and studying local customs. Marrakesh's chaotic energy and winding souks represented exactly the kind of immersive experience he craved. His Instagram showed countless photos of genuine interactions with locals, always respectful but unafraid to venture beyond designated tourist zones. That afternoon, while searching for an authentic carpet to send home as a gift, the trio wandered off the main souk into a dimly lit side alley. A merchant, recognizing their interest, beckoned them behind his stall, promising superior selections hidden from casual browsers. Several locals warned them softly. "Not for tourists," one muttered. But Cole grinned. He had always trusted his gut over vague warnings, and the chance to find something rare felt worth the risk. He figured the locals were just being protective or trying to steer them towards safer, pricier shops. The back area was cramped with uneven stone floors. Beyond the carpet rolls and cluttered shelves, a single a narrow service corridor opened up, used by merchants for loading deliveries and storage. According to two nearby vendors, a heavily loaded donkey cart was slowly reversing down that tight passage. The cart groaned under crates of ceramic tagine pots, while its young handler, distracted by a phone conversation, guided the animal carelessly. As Cole and his friends examined carpets behind the stall, one friend cracked a joke that sent Cole into laughter. Still chuckling, he stepped backward without looking, his boot striking a loose wooden crate. He stumbled, losing his balance and falling directly into the path of the approaching cart. The donkey startled violently, spooked by the sudden movement and clattering wood, and lurched forward with devastating force. The cart's heavy wooden axle crushed Cole's torso against the stone wall with a sickening impact. Witnesses described hearing a wet thud followed immediately by his friend's horrified screams. Blood pooled rapidly on the dusty ground as Cole collapsed without a word, his chest catastrophically crushed. One vendor ran for help, while another desperately held the panicked donkey's reins. Police arrived within minutes, cordoning off the area and arresting both the merchant and cart operator for criminal negligence. Local authorities confirmed tourists were never supposed to access the service corridor, especially during active cart operations. The narrow passage lacked proper safety barriers or warning signs, but did nothing after the incident. Cole's parents flew to Morocco 2 days later to identify his body and arrange repatriation. His funeral was held in the small hockey rink where he'd once played goalie, drawing hundreds of mourners, family, friends, and former teammates who remembered his curiosity, humor, and generous heart. It was November 12, 2018. The Bight of Abaco lay calm above one of the most dangerous cave systems in the Northern Hemisphere. The cathedral, known in diving circles as both sacred and deadly, its tight passages and sudden silt-outs made every descent a gamble. Mateo Rivas had spent his life chasing those edges. At 29, Mateo was a seasoned cave diver with over 400 logged descents, some in the shadowy cenotes of Mexico, others in the tight, lung-crushing tunnels of Florida and the Caribbean. Raised in Tampa alongside his older brother Julian, Mateo had turned curiosity into obsession, and obsession into discipline. Where Julian was measured, triple-checking gauges, scrutinizing gas mixes, logging every variable, Mateo moved with instinct, muscle memory, and a kind of blind faith in his own capacity. Together they were a perfect balance, and they had planned this dive for over a year. The cathedral offered no official maps, only rumors traded between divers and grainy forum threads. There were whispers of a passage dropping beyond 280 feet, a side shaft branching off the main corridor, unconfirmed and unexplored. That was their goal. The plan was precise. A two-stage descent. Julian would remain at the main chamber, managing the tethered video line and audio feed, while Mateo pushed ahead with a guideline and body cam. The first 10 minutes were smooth. Mateo descended with clarity and control. At 227 feet, he gave a thumbs up to the chest-mounted camera. Visibility remained decent. Julian monitored the feed from a waterproof tablet on the surface relay board, watching Mateo's light carve through the cathedral-like caverns. The video was choppy but clear enough, until it wasn't. Julian leaned closer. The feed stuttered, then picked up again. Mateo had entered a side shaft, its walls tight enough to press his shoulders inward. Julian watched as his brother exhaled slowly, flattening his chest to squeeze through. The light flickered, bounced off disturbed silt. Then the camera tilted hard. Mateo was stuck. He angled for leverage, feet braced. The hiss of escaping air filled the mic. Julian called out through the loop. Julian spoke urgently into the loop, telling Mateo to back out, not to force it, asking if he could hear him. There was no response. The feed trembled as Mateo reached toward his left tank. The image blurred. Clouds of silt, the frantic movement of hands. Then the faceplate flashed into view, Mateo's eyes wide with effort, jaw clenched. Julian's voice cut through again, cracking with panic, telling him to stop moving, that he was coming down. But Mateo wasn't stopping. He twisted his body, trying to turn. The slate on his wrist came into view, scrawled with one word in grease pencil. Stuck. Then the camera slammed sideways. For a moment, there was only blackness. Then a final frame. Mateo motionless, the light flickering against his helmet. A faint hiss, then nothing. The feed froze. Julian dropped his headset and suited up and descended. At 210 feet, he found the side shaft. The silt hadn't settled. He crawled in, heart pounding, knowing exactly what lay ahead. Just beyond a jagged choke point, he saw the collapsed rock and the faint glow of Mateo's torch, flickering behind a veil of debris. He tried to dig. The limestone shifted, then sealed tighter. His gloves tore and his hands bled. His brother did not move. Julian stayed until his reserves ran dry, until he had no choice but to leave that narrow space behind. The recovery team arrived 3 days later. It took 6 divers and a pulley system to extract Mateo from beyond the choke point. He had been trapped within minutes, likely from an equipment failure or a surge of exertion as he tried to force his way through. Mateo's funeral was held in Tampa. The casket remained closed. Divers came from across the country, placing slates and dive tags beside the urn. No one has attempted the shaft since. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.